Hey guys, Austin here again with CR Components. Today we're going to be showing how to assemble both your brake piston and your brake assembly, all your brake discs for, we call them flatties here. This is essentially a video for MCR10s, 5s, and 6s. There's a bunch of different variations. They're all on newer Bobcat track loaders. We call them flatties because one, they're shorter than the old style of long nose and short nose where they have the deep disc sprockets, whereas these just have a flat sprocket, and they actually have your whole brake assembly in the back side here instead of way up on the top. So this video will be pretty straightforward on how we do our assembly process here, the face seal installation, pretty much everything you know to get back up to your rotating group and bolt everything back together. So we do offer all the kits here for them. So this video is pretty much just me showing you how I put it back together, so that way you can do this on your own. Pretty much every seal we have will grease. There's two internal brake piston seals here, and they kind of click in a little harder than most other seals. So we get these in here. There's two different types of outer seals. One's an actual O-ring and one's a square cut outer seal. And so your O-ring goes on the top half of your brake piston, where the square cut goes on the bottom. Bottom being where your brake piston posts go in is how I'm referring to that. So go ahead and get these seals in. So once you get your four main seals in here, just make sure there's no twist in the square seal when you put it in. That's about the only installation tip on that one. They're pretty easy. You can get, there's three, let's see, that's an easier way to look at it. There's three of these larger size that go on the bottom of your post, and three of the bigger size up here. So just to make it a little easier on myself, I like to put the bottom one in first, and then these just go right in to the little grooves, and then you can put your smaller one in right over the top, and those will go right in. All right. So the way that this brake piston works, this one we had to clean up a little bit, had some rust on it from another core. You have this side that's almost completely flat, except for it's got a little bit of machining in it, whereas the actual top side has this big ridge right here, and that's the side that'll face up. So this goes on pretty easy, not a super tight fit to slide right down there. Next up, put my shaft seal in here. I just put a light coat of grease around the outside and then try and get a little bit on the inside, not too much. It just helps everything slide together and we're not pinching anything. So this shaft seal has the back side here, and then it's got the actual pressure side, and there's a little spring in there you can see. Probably not very well in the video, but when you get your hands on it, you'll be able to tell. So that pressure side, the spring side, faces down into your bearings here. And this isn't too hard of a fit either. Sometimes you can get it by hand, sometimes it takes a little bit. Gotta tap it with a dead blow or something to get it in there, but luckily I got mine in without having to smack it too much. If you do have to use a dead blow, just avoid hitting the actual flange here, because this is where this seals down on the inside of here. So you don't want to dent this in and inevitably cause early leaking. So now that we got that done, I like to on the inside of here, because this is your whole sealing area, both in here and on the back side. So I like to just run grease. I already have some in there a little bit ago. But just a little thin layer of grease all the way around just helps everything slide in just a little smoother. That way we don't have to worry about pinching any O-rings. So, and then I also put some on this face seal area too. The reason being for the grease with the face seal areas here, they're not a super tight fit like some of the other Rexroth style final drives. They've got really tight fits. And some people say not to use grease just because it can hold dirt in between there on your seals and cause wear. I try and just do a little thin layer, mainly because we don't have the press tools to push them in, so we're having to use, I have a little screwdriver I'll show you here in a second, just to kind of pry it in. And so every once in a while there's a chance that that O-ring could roll, and if the O-ring rolls, that's when you start to have issues. So having a little bit of grease in there as you press these two housings together allows that a little bit of a smoother transition, so that way if there is any kind of little twists, we won't have to worry about them actually getting stuck in a twist. It should press itself all nice and flat. So let's go ahead, let's grab our spring. So now that we've got everything greased up, the first thing that goes in here is your brake piston spring, and you got a bull side, the side that, you know, is concave, that goes down. So bull side just goes right down in there, and now your brake piston. So your brake piston, when I mentioned the bottom, is here where you have these little posts. That's what's going to be facing up. So we'll go ahead and drop that down in. Now you probably won't be able to push it all the way with your thumb. You see how it kind of dropped in there. You can kind of get it started, but you're not likely going to be able to push that all the way down. So we'll have to work our way over the press here. Try and press this the rest of the way. And there's nothing really you can catch, so we kind of just get in here with what we need to, whatever gets you to the top of your press. If I can get that to stay still. My brake piston looks a little cockeyed, but I think we'll be all right. So on the other side of this press here, I've got a gauge that shows me obviously how much pressure I'm putting down on here. So I go until you can see the snap ring groove right here, which you would have removed while taking it apart. Normally you can tell about where it's going to bottom out, so I like to get 1 or 2 pumps just so I know it presses it down. And this should jump up just a little bit, not anything probably even visible on the camera really. Okay, it did move a little bit. And that's just your brake spring from applying a little bit more pressure. It pushes it back up to square. So we got that down in there. The only thing I do once I get it off the press is I like to just double check. Double checking your snap ring area in here, all the way around, and then here. Because if you have any kind of pinching, that seal is more than likely going to be in that snap ring groove. So I like to double check that just to make sure nothing's broken off in there. So next, we'll grab you got this big coil snap ring that, like I had mentioned before, you would have had to taken off to get this apart and cleaned up. So I like to just hold it in place and go about halfway from where the start of the coil is. And then it's more just working this thing around, trying not to let it spring back up and smack your finger, because that doesn't feel good. So then once you get it to this point, I kind of just sit here and you tap it back and forth, and you'll hear it click in right there. And normally there'll be a little line on your actual snap ring and it'll be completely seated. So you can kind of go around and just tap the sides just to make sure it's in. This one's definitely seated. Most of the time when they're fully seated, both of the coils of the snap ring here and here will be totally flush like they are now. If for whatever reason this is too high and it's not in, more than likely this top coil is going to be stuck out a little further, or one of them is going to be wonky. So that's something to keep an eye out for. So up next we can go ahead and put our face seals in, which I will show you real quick. We do have these here. Like I said, all the parts are available, including this brake pack, which I'll show you in a second. So I like to put these face seals on, pretty much any of these O-ring style face seals. I try and get them as flat as I can on the back side, and then I just hold them down with the palms of my hand and just kind of stretch it over the top. Again, we want to avoid any kind of rolling. That's the biggest thing, is you don't want to have this thing rolled. So then it won't sit in there easy. Go ahead and do the same thing. So get it as far as I can with just my palms, and then I just use my thumbs to stretch it over the top. And that generally keeps me pretty straight. So Sometimes, like I said, these face seals just like that just popped right there, right in for me. This side, the spindle side, is normally pretty, I wouldn't say loose, but it definitely, you can see how it's got a little bit of play, and that play will leave as soon as you get the preload on both of these bearings, because it'll push itself down and space itself out properly and actually seal itself. So I've just got this tiny little screwdriver that I filed down the edges on so I don't have anything sharp. And generally I'm not trying to stab it, more so just help push it down. So I keep pretty even pressure here. So one side normally always ends up falling in a little more than the other, and I just kind of keep even pressure with my hand and just slowly work my way around. Keep going. And like I said, luckily these aren't the absolute worst to put in. I've had some that are nightmares to get in. There's such tight tolerances. So once you get to here, the best thing you can do is kind of check here. Like you can see right here, we're just a little bit lower the O-ring is compared to here. Some people will measure them with calipers, which is definitely totally fine to do. I haven't ever had issues with these leaking on me outside of this. So I like to just give it a little push with my hands. And you want to try and keep these as clean as possible, because obviously with these mechanical metal face seals, that's what's going to keep all of your oil for your brake pack inside where it needs to be and not leaking on you. So there's a couple more steps with the face seal, but we'll go ahead and get started on the brake. So the next thing we're going to do is, you got this big brake spacer here, and this doesn't necessarily matter which way it goes. It's either or. It's pretty much universal. Can't put this thing on wrong. Just make sure you put it on before you put your brakes in. So now that that's down there, we can go ahead and get started putting our brakes together. So what I like to do is I'll lay out an extra napkin or paper towel. And with these brake packs, we have these brand new here. They release right between 180 and 200 psi with the brake release. Now they do have shims in them, which when you stack these up, you've got inner gears, and the reason why we call them, or inner discs rather. The reason why we call them inner discs is because this tab here goes on the inside, and that's what locks it into the housing. And then you have outer discs, which essentially match this profile here. So we have inner and outer discs, and then we have shims. And the shims are always going to be up at the top. So like I said, these release around 180 to 200 psi on your brake release. And if you want, for whatever reason, to lighten that up a little bit, obviously if you take a shim or two out, you'll end up having a lighter brake release, which means less pressure, and you're having a little bit of a weak pump going on. So we just order all of our oil from Bobcat. It's what they recommend to use. We order for the big MCR10s, the bigger motors, single speed and 2 speeds of those. Those take 17.5 fluid ounce bottles, so that's all we order here. But these little MCR6s and MCR5s only need 12 ounces, so I got to pour a little bit out of this one, which works out pretty well for me because I like to make sure all of my brake discs are lubricated before going in. Which, same thing with any kind of seals here. We always try and grease every seal, make sure every bearing's oiled. All of our discs are, that way just nothing's running dry right when you start the machine up. Obviously we have a test bench here, so we hook these motors up and run them so they're as wet can be when it comes to rust prevention and making sure that happens. But if you're doing this on your own, I recommend for sure doing this next step, especially with your brake disc, because this is where a lot of internal failures happen, is with this brake. So I've got my 12 ounces here now, but what I like to do is I'll take the excess oil and I'll just kind of leave it out, and then just one at a time make sure they're oiled up. It doesn't need to be dripping like it is now. Obviously there's just a lot of oil on my rag, and that's why it's got a lot on there. It's more of just a thin coat either side, just so nothing, like I said, is starting dry. So okay, so now the easiest thing to do The way I like to line these up, I've just got a square block here, and what I'll try and do is generally just make sure that these are all completely flush. If you line them up as they're stacking, it's not too bad. The only thing you don't want to do is start putting your bolts on before they're lined up, because then you're going to run into trouble. So I generally try and line up and just get an idea, make sure that this side of your outer brake discs is about equal distance on the back of your face seal, and this side of your outer brake discs, both like the right side and the left side when you're looking down, are about the same. And then, like I said, just trying to make sure that these are lined up, and that is about all you got to do there. So the easiest way to do this is like you're putting on a car tire. I only ever put 4 bolts in at a time, which I like to put a little bit of Loctite on the end of these bolts just in case, because they do have some pressure on them. So just a dab on each, just to try and, just in case anything rattles around in there, so nothing comes loose, because if one of those bolts comes loose, you'll end up shredding all through down here and blow your brake pack up, and then you're back in the same situation again, just with less parts and not a working drive motor. So I generally just get these down about hand tight first, and the reason being why you want to tighten them, you know, in a star pattern, or I guess a cross, because there's only 4 now. But reason being is if you over tighten on one side, and say you tighten everything down on the right side, it'll shift this whole brake pack over, and then you won't actually be able to flip this over and align them down in. So I generally just go right where I start to feel it get tight. I go about a 1/4 turn, and it takes a little bit of time, but I'd rather take a little bit of time now than have to pull this whole thing back apart and mess with the brake discs again. So there we go. So you'll feel these snug up, and as soon as you feel them snug up, I've never had any issues. You can normally just give it one more crank with a regular size ratchet, and you are not going to have any problems. You could look the torque specs up on these bolts, but I don't think it's 100% necessary. So what I'm going to do next, what you can do in this situation is you can go ahead and test. If you don't want to put the next set of 4 bolts in, just to double check your work, you can go ahead and flip this over onto your spindle and try and get the seat down and make sure that your brake discs are aligned properly. I've done enough of these that I'm pretty confident that mine's going to slide right in. There is a little wiggle room in there, so it's not like a perfectly tight tolerance, but it is close enough that if you want to avoid having to pull everything back out and undo 8 bolts, you can at least try it with 4, and if it works, then flip it back over and do what I'm about to do now and just tighten up the last bit of your bolts. Okay, so like I said, all the seals we do here get greased, and everything bearing wise gets oil. So I'll grab some hydraulic oil really quick. That's the one nice thing about these motors, is that most of the time your bearings are going to be pretty good, because you'll see when I flip this over, the actual hydraulic oil from your hydraulic side is what keeps these bearings lubricated. So it's pretty much impossible for them to ever go dry, and on a lot of other styles of Rexroth motors and even other final drives, that's the biggest issue that we run into, is stuff going dry, and that's what causes things to break. So I just put a little oil in my hand, go ahead and wipe that all over my bearing race on the inside here, and then I also like to make sure it doesn't need to be a crazy amount. Plus I'm going to pour a little bit more oil in once I get this flipped over, just enough so that way I know when I throw this thing on the test bench, it's not bare metal on bare metal, and there's at least a little bit of oil here. So the only last step is just to double check and make sure there's no debris on your face seal here at all, that everything's perfectly cleaned off. Because again, you don't want anything in between that metal on metal surface, because that's what's going to cause you to wear faster. And then I've always just used the same oil that I put in your gearbox, or I guess you could call this a brake box. And it's recommended that you just put just a real thin layer of oil, and I only ever do it on one side. Doesn't matter which side. The spindle side's a little easier because there's not all of everything in your way. So I just do a nice thin little layer of oil, and that just helps with longevity and the life of your face seals here. Hopefully keep you rolling for longer. So now that we got those oiled, your bearings are oiled, everything's good to go, we're clean. Let's flip this over, and hopefully I wasn't too confident and have to pull this back out. So there's no real right or wrong method to flipping this in here. The biggest thing again is that these outer brake discs are what's going on the inside here. When you flip this over, if your face seals are touching, you're down far enough. If not, then your brake discs are a little misaligned. So manual here, if you're misaligned, you'll be separated just a little bit on your face seals, but luckily I am not. You can kind of see down in here that my face seals are making contact with each other. And like I said, you can see if I can get it to wiggle. You can see how there's about that much play between your housings and where your brake discs are actually going in. So you do have a little wiggle room to be off on your brake discs. Obviously, the closer to perfectly square they are, the easier your life's going to be getting it in there. So now the only other thing here is second bearings going in. And again, I'll pour this over the top of this bearing just so all my extra oil kind of falls back down in this bottom bearing. Wipe that down, make sure that's nice and wet. Then after that, all we got is to put, don't forget your washer, that's what actually gives you your preload. So we'll put this back in the press real quick, and then I'll show you once I get it pressed on how I install the ears, and then also how we fill our gearboxes. Big ones? Yeah. Like 300 pounds? Once you get this pressed on, again, this is what actually sets essentially your preload. I mean, your bearings getting pressed down is what's going to do it as well, but you got two ears here. Now, most of the time, especially with these flat MCR Rexroth motors, I don't normally have any issues where I need to leave it in the press to get this to punch on. I just take a hammer and a punch here, and we'll just kind of tap it. And so you can see how that just kind of slides right in there. And you'll see how it starts. Now every once in a while, if there's one that's super tight, it'll actually, like, it won't go in. Like, you'll definitely know it if it's not wanting to go in, and you can break these ears. So fortunately for me, this one is going in nice and easy. So the only other thing to be aware of is if you get this, say, too close to this side, it won't actually seat right on the bottom side of your rotating group. So you want to try and make sure when you're getting this second ear in to make sure it's as even as it can be on either side. And if it is one side or the other, like if it's leaning one way, the side that's closest to, like say this was closer here, I could punch here and it'll shimmy it the other way. So mine's going in pretty straight, so I'm just gonna keep tapping it in straight. And I've had them where they are just about touching. You can kind of see on either side that gap's pretty much the same. So now that we got our ears in, we're good to go. Since you have it on the bench, I found it's way easier and way faster just to flip it and do it now to fill your gearbox, or brake box I should say. And all we do here now, Bobcat gives you, when you buy oil from them, they give you this nifty little plastic cap. You can cut the top of it off to open it up, and then they normally have a rubber hose with it. I don't use the rubber hose because I just flip this upside down. Only takes maybe 2 minutes max, and then I just cut a hole in the top of the bottle. So unless you want to keep your bottle, give it some extra airflow at the top, and that's it. All right, so we got our oil filled up here. Again, the recommended amount from Bobcat with their oil for the bigger MCR10s. For those final drives, they take 17.5 fluid ounces of the Bobcat drive motor oil, and these smaller 5s and 6s take 12. So again, oil plugs, make them as tight as you want. It's your machine. You got to take the oil plugs back off. I normally just snug them up and give them a little tap to make sure they're not going to unscrew themselves. But after that, most people won't even take their rotating group apart. So all that's really left is just putting your cam seals in and your brake release seals. Make sure those ports are lined up. Rotating group, your distributor on top, your distributor housing and the distributor. Put that on top, line your bolts up, torque them down, and you're good to go. Thanks for watching.